Here, this is the divorce form. I've already filled in my name. Don't think that a useless woman who can't even bear children can remain my wife forever, okay? Infertile defective goods should just leave. Oh, poor wife. But it can't be helped, right? A woman who can't have children is finished. Well, don't worry, I'll make George happy. George brought his pregnant mistress to his parents-in-law's house. He had just returned from a 3-month business trip. But he appeared energetic and not at all tired. The two mocked me silently as I sat in front of the divorce papers. However, my silence wasn't due to shock. After a deep sigh, I spoke up. Congratulations on your pregnancy. The baby in your belly is twins, right? I think it's going to be tough, but please do your best. What's with you? Are these just sour grapes? In this situation, I guess you have no choice but to pretend to be strong, huh? Judy, my wife is really stupid. Wait. George, something's not right about what she said. How does she know the baby is twins? We didn't mention it at all, did we? Right after, George looked startled and turned his gaze toward me. I glared at my husband, quietly containing my anger. George, Judy. I know everything. I've been preparing for today. The air in the living room had become as cold as ice. As I alone was being blamed, my anger continued to rise uncontrollably. You will regret this for the rest of your lives. No matter what, I've resolved once again. I smirked to myself. Then, someone appeared in the living room. My mother-in-law. Her arrival made the atmosphere even heavier. Oh George, you're back from your business trip? Getting all excited because you had a child. She was delighted to see her son. And Judy is here too. Congratulations on the baby. Is it a boy? A girl? Do you know yet? It seemed my mother-in-law already knew about Judy's child. She was in an unusually good mood. However, her expression turned cold when she looked at me. And Kate. I'm amazed you're still in this house. An infertile woman like you has no business staying married to my son. You're not worthy of a man who works at a big corporation. George indeed works at a large corporation. I work as a translator, barely making ends meet. Always receiving sarcastic remarks from my mother-in-law about my income. Isn't your husband here today? My husband? If you mean him, he's overseas for work, as usual. She shrugged her shoulders in frustration. Planning to run to him crying again? His ideas are too lenient. Always taking your side, which I hate. My father-in-law is a businessman who spends most of the year working abroad. He's a reasonable man who would mediate if he were here. But in his absence, my mother-in-law and George are relentless. It was me who introduced George to Judy. I couldn't stand having an infertile woman as my son's wife anymore. Judy is far more suitable. George nodded in agreement with his mother's words. A mother's right. I don't need a useless woman like you. Get out of here. Sometimes a mother has to teach her son. If you don't like it, it's also necessary to cut ties early. Their confidence had been shaken earlier by the talk of twins. But gaining an ally quickly revived their spirit. I quietly listened to their words. Initially, my husband and mother-in-law were very kind to me. But 2 years passed without me getting pregnant, and their attitudes changed drastically. They began to call me infertile and useless. My husband wanted children to please his mother, who desperately wanted a grandchild. The fact that I couldn't provide a child was intolerable to them. I rekindled my determination, suppressing the anger bubbling inside me. I'll send them all to hell. How dare you talk so badly about others while excusing your own actions? I took out an envelope I had prepared. I'm not surprised or angry about what you're saying. I already know everything. The envelope contained evidence of George and Judy's affair. Pictures of them coming out of a hotel. On a day he told me he was on a business trip, they were enjoying French cuisine. They were also seen holding hands coming out of a spa hotel. The detective I hired was more capable than I imagined, digging deep into their affair. They wanted to see me shocked by the truths I didn't know. But there's no fun in it if I already knew everything from the start. George and my mother-in-law glared at me with a bold attitude. But panic was evident on Judy's face. Yet, I didn't touch on that but continued pressing on. George, you've hardly been home lately and have been gallivanting around, haven't you? You started making snide remarks. I thought it was inevitable at first. It's true that we couldn't have children. Whether it's common among couples or not, we had always longed for children. Despite our hopes, we weren't blessed with children. It was understandable that our relationship turned cold. The problem came afterward. You started blaming me for our inability to have children. That's why I suggested it, right? Let's try fertility treatments. But you refused. Our narrative was inconsistent. He wanted children but didn't want to undergo fertility treatments. Indeed, fertility treatments are expensive. However, George works for a large corporation and isn't financially strained. Even if I earn less than him, I still make enough to afford fertility treatments. That's why I thought maybe there was something you were hiding. When I hired a detective, the things that came out. How could you do whatever you wanted like this? So what? That doesn't change the fact that you're an infertile, useless woman. How shameless to investigate an affair, are you stupid? You're just making yourself more miserable. Who really is the miserable one here? I smiled back mockingly at the mother-in-law, who sneered with disdain. By the way, mother, have you congratulated Judy? It seems she is having twins. Mother-in-law, huh? Of course, I have. I'm so happy, twins? The mother-in-law tilted her head in confusion. Yes, mother. Judy's child is twins. We're getting 2 grandchildren at once. It's like God gave us twins to make up for the delay caused by Kate. Having an affair and then receiving support, what kind of absurd God would do that? The more I think about it, the more I feel like crying over my own foolishness for having been married to such a person. Now that I remember, how did you know my child is twins, Kate? Huh? Kate knew Judy's child is twins? She's just guessing, there's no way she could know. She's full of lies. George had a lot to say as always, but Judy's expression didn't clear up. But how do you explain knowing about the twins? The way Judy looked at me had completely changed to something eerie. Even after seeing this, do you still think I'm only lying? I pulled out a piece of paper from the file I had prepared and showed it to them. It was an obstetrician's test result. Of course, it was Judy's. Under the item for multiple pregnancies, there was an entry for twins. It was proof that Judy's child is twins. What is this? How did you get this? It seemed George had seen this medical report before. He couldn't deny that this report was a lie. That's creepy. You didn't break into my house, did you? You stole it, right? No. I asked someone for it, and they gave me the test results. Who else could get my test results other than me? A hospital wouldn't release personal information to a complete stranger. I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity. There is one more person, isn't there? Someone who could legally obtain a medical certificate from the hospital. Judy's face turned pale with shock. But the next moment, all color drained from her face. Then, the doorbell at the in-laws' house rang. Who is it at this time? Instead of the cursing mother-in-law, I went to the entrance. I invited the person who had arrived right on time into the in-laws' house. He was a slender man with an earnest demeanor. George and the mother-in-law didn't know who he was. However, Judy was clearly shaken. Sweat beads formed on her forehead, and her face was pale. "Andrew, why are you here?" The man named Andrew remained silent, his expression stern. "Let me introduce him. This is Judy's husband, Andrew Smith." "Husband? Judy has a husband? I didn't know." George, shocked as if doused with cold water, stood up, knocking his chair over. "My hired detective found out that Judy has a husband." George and the mother-in-law's faces turned pale. Amazement and confusion mingled as they looked at each other. "Andrew was the one who got us the hospital's report. Judy, you were diagnosed with having children but kept it silent from Andrew, didn't you?" "That's..." Judy turned her face away, stammering. As Judy's husband, Andrew could obtain the medical report from the hospital without issue. It was unfortunate that he had to learn of his wife's pregnancy in such a manner. "Judy has been married to Andrew before she started having an affair with you, George. She disappeared from Andrew's sight when she knew she was pregnant and went to you." I smiled at George and the mother-in-law, who were speechless. Judy's children are indeed twins. But they aren't George's children. "So, George, do you still intend to be a father?" George was silent for a moment, then his face turned red with rage. "Lies. I can't believe it. That can't be. That's impossible." The mother-in-law screamed in denial. Ignoring them, Andrew approached Judy and confronted her sharply. "Judy, why did you have an affair? Tell me why." "Andrew. You were always busy with work and hardly ever came home. I felt lonely." Andrew was a police officer. He had been busy chasing a criminal that had been causing a stir recently. Indeed, he had been too busy to return home for days. Andrew, a man of strong responsibility, had been tirelessly pursuing the criminal. He explained his circumstances, but kept his stern expression. "I regret not being able to spend much time with you recently. But that doesn't justify having an affair." He sighed deeply. "I'm worried about the children in your belly. What Judy did is irreversible. These children coming into the world are innocent." The room fell heavy with his words. Judy knelt on the floor, clutching her stomach, and began to sob deeply. "I'm sorry, Andrew. I'll do anything, so please forgive me." Although Judy begged for forgiveness, Andrew simply turned his face away, unable to respond. It was not a situation where an immediate answer could be given or accepted. I glanced at George and his mother. Both stood in shock, unable to utter a word. "Do you see now? This is your reality." The joy of expecting a child was shattered by the appearance of their real father, whom they had not known existed. It's understandable that they did not want to accept what was unfolding before them. However, the mother-in-law finally spoke up. "This con artist. She's been deceiving us, hasn't she?" Her face turned red and she spat as she yelled at Judy. "How are you going to take responsibility for ruining my son's life? A husband? Are you kidding me? Just when I thought we were finally having a baby, how are you going to fix this, Judy?" Seizing the moment, George also began to berate Judy. Judy started crying even harder. And the atmosphere in the living room became increasingly tense. Seeing enough, Andrew stepped between Judy, George, and the mother-in-law. "Her actions are certainly reprehensible. However, both of you also have a responsibility in this that you must not forget." He was absolutely right. The mother-in-law who introduced Judy to her son despite knowing he was married. And George, who accepted it and tried to have a child with her, were not innocent either. I have no intention of defending Judy, but it's hard not to point out their hypocrisy. Quiet. We are the victims here. Exactly. After deceiving people, what kind of excuse is that? A foolish mother and son, never admitting their faults. I held back Andrew, who was about to confront them angrily. George, even after seeing this, can you still say you are completely blameless? I pulled out another envelope I had prepared and threw it at George. The contents spilled out onto the floor. George and his mother's expressions changed upon seeing them. What is this? The contents of the envelope were several photographs. In them, George was pictured with another woman. However, the woman was not Judy. This is evidence that George has been cheating not only with Judy but also with multiple other women. Hearing this, Judy looked in shock at the photographs scattered on the floor. What is this? George, you're the real fraud. How dare you propose marriage to me? No, that's not true. I haven't been with any other women. This is all a setup. Look at these photos, it's clearly you. Take a good look. George and Judy began arguing. Andrew held his head in dismay, unable to say anything. Even the mother-in-law seemed to be in shock, staring blankly at the photos she had picked up. Her son, whom she thought was being guided properly, was secretly wreaking havoc. It was difficult for any mother to accept. However, the mother-in-law suddenly slammed her hand on the floor. Kate. This is all your fault. My fault? Yes. It all started because you are infertile and useless. If you had just had children sooner, none of this would have happened. I wanted grandchildren quickly. How are you going to fix my life plans now? Life plans, huh? The mother-in-law had her own vision of life. Doesn't she realize that she is distorting her own life? George looked sadly at his screaming mother. However, George suddenly had a realization. Wait, Mom. Isn't there still a chance that Judy's child could be mine? Everyone in the room was left with a question mark over their heads. Because around the time Judy got pregnant, we were meeting almost every week. It makes more sense that Judy's child is mine. Andrew grimaced, distressed. The fact that his wife had an affair behind his back being blatantly discussed. It couldn't feel good. Is that possible? Judy, what do you say? The mother-in-law regained a bit of hope and questioned Judy. The very person she had just called a fraud. Judy looked troubled. It was impossible to know who the father was before the child was even born. Judy herself had relations with two men at the same time, so she didn't know whose child it was. Perhaps Judy thought it didn't matter whose child it was as long as she married George. Exactly, it's definitely my child, Mom. Kate is just trying to trap us because she's infertile herself. What a dirty trick. About that, there's something I need to apologize for. Saying this, I took out a securely sealed envelope. If I had done this sooner, maybe you wouldn't have had to do something so stupid. I took out a piece of paper from the envelope and handed it to George. As he read the contents, he was shocked. What is this? That, George, is the result of your fertility test. It's not me who's infertile. George, it was because you are infertile that we couldn't have children. I wanted children just as much. That's why I suggested fertility treatments. George refused, but I wanted to do something. So, I secretly took a sample from George. I had fertility tests done for both of us. George was found to have an abnormality in his sperm, meaning he could not father children. This means that Judy's child is actually Andrew's. George and his mother were left speechless, unable to accept this overwhelming truth. The mother-in-law's lips quivered and her eyes widened, while George's face turned pale, and he fell silent. Remember all those harsh words you've hurled at me? Calling me a useless, infertile woman because I couldn't have children? Now, let me return those words to you. I smiled sardonically at the two despondent figures before me. How does it feel to know you're the one who can't produce children? To know you're the infertile one? Don't mess with me. George yelled and lunged at me, but Andrew stepped in to restrain him. Still, George continued to shout. You did this test behind my back. Why did you hide it from me? You think you can mock me, you witch? You were too busy ignoring me and fooling around. We weren't exactly in a state to have a heart-to-heart, were we? By then, I had already started investigating your affairs. I never anticipated such a result from the fertility tests. Yet, here it was, and on top of it, the reality of his infidelity. All that filled me was pure rage and an inability to forgive. The sound of tearing paper echoed. The mother-in-law had ripped up the results of her son's fertility test. One ridiculous claim after another. I've had enough. I never thought you could be such a vile woman. She crumpled up the fertility results and threw them at me. Don't you ever show your face here again, you foolish woman. I stepped toward the raging mother-in-law. You may think you're done talking, but I'm not. I pulled out my smartphone and displayed several images. The photos showed the mother-in-law in intimate poses with an unknown man. Her complexion visibly worsened. Where did these come from? These are photos of you having an affair. While I was investigating how you introduced Judy to George, I also found out about your own secret meetings with this man. George and Judy looked at the mother-in-law with shock. She seemed about to make an excuse, then clenched her teeth and glared at me. Yes, I'm having an affair. My husband is almost never home. He's always abroad. Life with him has become dull. The man I'm seeing now is exciting, and I intend to remarry. George, her son, seemed the most shocked by her cold confession. However, I had no sympathy left for him. You always said a mother has to teach her children, right? Were you teaching him about infidelity from your own experiences? Such exemplary education from you, mother-in-law. Yes, that's right. You should switch marriage partners quickly if needed. She brazenly admitted it. I confronted her straightforwardly. Mother, you are being deceived. The mother-in-law frowned and tilted her head. Deceived? What do you know? She continued smugly. I'm moving forward with the marriage. When my husband returns next, I'll present him with divorce papers. It's only fair, given how he's neglected me. I've even pooled money with my new partner, everything is ready. I laughed out loud at her foolish actions. Mother, is this the man you're involved with? I presented a photo of a man, clearly taken, showing his face prominently. The mother-in-law's expression changed upon seeing it, and Andrew, observing from a distance, looked even more astonished. Yes, that's him. What are you trying to say? I delivered the worst news. This man, your lover, is part of a marriage fraud group. The mother-in-law froze, unable to comprehend, then let out a dry laugh. That can't be. Are you just having fun at my expense? When was the last time you were in contact with him? Hasn't it been a few days since you've heard from him? What does that matter? He's just busy with work. That man is currently in police custody. Andrew intervened in our conversation. Exactly as Kate said. He's a member of a marriage fraud group. Recently arrested. Andrew had been pursuing a case involving a marriage fraud ring, a well-organized group that had vexed the police for years. It had been reported on the news just days ago that they had finally been arrested. Andrew's confirmation forced the mother-in-law to face the truth. Such a thing, it can't be. It's true. The man you plan to remarry is only trying to swindle you out of your money. The police will likely contact you soon as a victim. Andrew nodded awkwardly. While he seemed somewhat sympathetic, I felt no such compassion. But I have a husband, so it's not a problem. I'll just have to endure it. I couldn't help but laugh. Do you think I haven't told your husband about this? Her expression froze, and at that moment, the living room door opened. Without ringing the intercom, the person who appeared at the in-laws' house was the head of the household. George's father, who was supposed to be abroad. Father, thank you for coming all this way. The father-in-law nodded gravely. The mother-in-law glared at me furiously, but when the father-in-law looked at her, both she and George shuddered. Why are you here? The father-in-law said nothing, just narrowed his eyes. This is all a misunderstanding. I was just trying to distract myself a little. That's right, Dad. This is all a misunderstanding by Kate. She's making a fuss all by herself. The father-in-law did not respond to their words, but turned to face me instead. Thank you for consulting with me, Kate. I understand how much you've suffered. George and the mother-in-law continued to make poor excuses. But a stern look from the father-in-law silenced them. What you two have done is inexcusable. It was incredibly foolish. The father-in-law's anger grew stronger. George, I am disowning you. You failed to fulfill your duties as a husband. Betrayed your wife, Kate, and displayed such disgrace. Do not show your face to me again. But. Ignoring George's collapse, the father-in-law turned to the mother-in-law. You are nothing but a useless parasite. You have been incredibly cruel to Kate, and even getting duped by a marriage scam. How could you be so foolish? The mother-in-law trembled but retorted. It's all your fault for always going abroad and leaving me alone in America. That's why I discussed all of this before we married. You said you'd come abroad with me, but as soon as we had children, you changed your mind and refused. Tears filled the mother-in-law's eyes, but the father-in-law was unforgiving. Since you want a divorce, it suits me fine. Let's get divorced. Wait. I didn't mean that. She tried to plead with the father-in-law, but he coldly turned her away. This is the result of your actions. Do not involve me anymore. The father-in-law slammed the divorce papers on the table. Overwhelmed by the father-in-law's irrefutable words, the mother-in-law tearfully signed the document. Throughout the process, she attempted to apologize to the father-in-law multiple times. But her apologies were ultimately never accepted. Andrew said he would talk with Judy and took her away. I started to fill in the divorce papers George had initially given me. Kate, wait a minute, wait. George was making a fuss, but I finished signing without paying any attention to him. It's too late. I don't want to hear anything from you. May you live miserably and go to hell. The father-in-law also advised me to properly claim compensation. Encouraged to correct what was wrong, George no longer argued. Time passed quietly after that. My divorce from George was successfully finalized, and we were completely separated. With the help of the father-in-law, the compensation claim was proceeding. However, the payments suddenly stopped. I didn't want to talk, so I ignored it until George contacted me. What do you want? I don't need anything from you except for the compensation. George paused for a moment, then spoke in a heavy tone. Actually, I'm being sued by someone other than Judy. I don't have enough money for legal fees and compensation. I wasn't surprised by his words. Right, you've been fired from the company as well. You might not have an income now, but well, Good luck. Wait, how do you know about the company? Your father told me. One of your affairs was with someone from a client company. And their president got so upset, he ended the business dealings. George suffered significant losses and was fired from the major company he used to brag about. After a moment of silence, George began to speak haltingly. Kate. I was wrong. I hurt you, and I truly regret how everything turned out. Please, forgive me. Let's start over. From the other end of the phone, I scoffed at George's pleading words. George, do you remember what you said to me? Don't think a useless woman who can't bear children can stay married forever. Let me return those exact words to you. George was speechless, left only with silence. It's over. Don't ever contact me again. The only thing I want from you is the compensation. With those final words, I hung up the phone. A few months later, Andrew informed me that Judy had safely given birth. The babies were twins, and a paternity test confirmed they were indeed Andrew's. However, ultimately, the two decided to divorce. At first, Andrew tried to salvage their relationship. But Judy remained unrestrained, even beginning to neglect the children, leading to an inevitable divorce. Andrew gained custody of both children and communicated his determination to raise them well. On the other hand, George and his mother seemed to be living a real-life hell. George was unable to secure a stable job, continuously sued by his affairs, and was financially and emotionally cornered. The mother-in-law, caught in a marriage scam, became known in her community, and the money she had invested never returned. Still, the two did not try to support each other, instead blaming one another. The mother-in-law once called my life dull. Yet, both of them together couldn't describe their lives as anything but miserable. With the help of my father-in-law, I decided to move abroad. Having worked as a translator and being confident in my language skills, I was invited by my father-in-law, who needed someone with international expertise, to start a job that involves traveling around the world. I once dreamed of a future with children. Once my life settles down, I think I'll try again to find a partner. And maybe one day, when I have children and they grow up, I'll proudly tell them the absurd tale of the foolish people I once knew. Determined not to let my life be dull, I took another step forward today.